as the projector flickered to life at the neighborhood's lavish block party. Marissa didn't see her evidence on the screen. She saw her husband's boot crushing the only USB drive containing the truth. With a fractured rib from a ceramic vase and her throat bruised from her mother-in-law's silk scarf, Marissa watched the community she once called friends raise their glasses to a woman who had just stolen her children. "She's mentally unfit," Evelyn whispered into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial pity as the police car pulled into the driveway. Marissa stood alone behind the catering tent, clutching a heavy silver serving tray like a shield, her life systematically deleted from every cloud and hard drive she owned. She had no money, no husband, and in 12 hours, her children would be driven to a boarding school they could never leave. But as the neighbors turned to stare at the woman they believed was a monster, Marissa reached into her pocket for the one thing a digital predator forgot: the paper trail. The library courier had just finished the final delivery, and 40 front porches held the secret that would either burn the neighborhood down or send Marissa to prison. The stain refused to fade. Marissa's fingers ached from scrubbing, the sponge's rough fibers snagging on the silk's delicate weave. The wine had seeped deep, a rust-colored shadow that mocked her every attempt to erase it. She pressed harder, her knuckles whitening, the scent of vinegar and lemon oil sharp in her throat. The rug's edges curled slightly under her weight, the fabric whispering against the hardwood like a reproach. It felt like a metaphor for her life, a persistent, ugly blotch on an otherwise pristine surface that she was expected to keep perfect. Every circular motion of her hand was a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of order. But the fibers were stubborn, holding onto the pigment with a tenacity that mirrored her own growing dread. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that preceded a storm, and Marissa found herself holding her breath, listening for the slightest shift in the atmosphere. The front door clicked open, the sound echoing through the foyer like a gunshot. Marissa didn't turn. She already knew the rhythm of those footsteps, quick, deliberate, the way Evelyn always moved like she owned the space before she even stepped inside. The spare key jingled back into its hiding place in the ceramic bowl by the door, a sound that grated like nails on glass. Evelyn didn't believe in knocking. She believed in presence, in the sudden, suffocating weight of her personality filling a room. Marissa felt the air shift, the temperature dropping as the older woman's shadow stretched across the hardwood, reaching toward the ruined rug. "You're still at it?" Evelyn's voice cut through the quiet, sharp as the scent of her perfume. Something floral and expensive, the kind that lingered in the air long after she left. She didn't wait for an answer. "That rug's ruined. You should have thrown it out weeks ago." She stood there, a vision of tailored perfection in a navy blazer. Her silver hair coiled into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her eyes, a cold, pale blue, scanned the room with the clinical detachment of a building inspector. "It's not just the rug, Marissa. Look at those baseboards. Dust is practically a structural element in this house now. And the children." Clara was wearing mismatched socks again this morning. It's a lack of discipline, a lack of care. Marissa's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding together until her head throbbed. The sponge squelched in her grip, water dripping onto the floor in slow, uneven plops. "It's not ruined," she whispered, though the lie tasted like ash. She forced herself to stand, her knees popping from the duration of her kneeling. She wiped her damp hands on her apron, trying to find some shred of dignity as she faced the woman who had spent the last decade slowly eroding her sense of self. Evelyn's smile was a thin, bloodless line, the kind of expression one might give a particularly slow child. It was a power play, a domestic siege where the weapons were snide remarks and the battlefield was the foyer. The weight of Evelyn's judgment followed Marissa into the kitchen, a physical presence that made the air feel thick and difficult to swallow. Seeking a moment of digital sanctuary, Marissa pulled her laptop toward her on the marble island. She needed to check the summer camp registrations. Liam was looking forward to the robotics program, and Clara had been talking about the equestrian camp for months. But as the family cloud account loaded, a cold pit formed in her stomach. The folders were there, but the contents were gone. The summer 2024 directory was empty. No confirmation emails, no medical forms, no payment receipts. It was as if the last 3 months of planning had been wiped from existence with a single, malicious keystroke. Marissa's breath hitched. She refreshed the page, her fingers trembling as they tapped the trackpad. Nothing. She checked the trash bin, the archive, the secondary backups. Blank. Someone had gone in and systematically deleted every trace of the children's summer plans. Her mind raced, cataloging the possibilities. But the list of people with access to the password was dangerously short. David, herself, and Evelyn. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a glitch. It was sabotage. It was a calculated strike designed to leave her children adrift, and Marissa looking like the incompetent mother Evelyn so frequently accused her of being. "Is something wrong, dear? You look a bit peaked." Evelyn was suddenly there, leaning against the doorframe, a porcelain teacup cradled in her manicured hands. She peered over Marissa's shoulder at the screen, her expression one of faux concern that didn't reach her predatory eyes. Technology can be so temperamental. Perhaps you simply forgot to hit save. You have been so scattered lately. I noticed the laundry is still in the basket, and the dishes... Well, the sink is a testament to your current state of mind. Marissa ignored the barb, her focus entirely on the screen as she navigated to the camp's website. I didn't forget to save, Evelyn. The files were there yesterday. Someone deleted them. She began typing frantically, trying to log into the registration portal. But the site was sluggish, the spinning wheel of death mocking her urgency. Every second felt like an hour. She could feel Evelyn's gaze on her, a heavy, judgmental weight. The older woman let out a soft, tisking sound, the noise a sharp needle against Marissa's frayed nerves. "You're making such a fuss. If you can't manage a simple calendar, how can you be expected to manage a household? Maybe it's for the best. The children need stability, not this frantic, disorganized energy you're projecting." The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent trill that broke the suffocating tension of the kitchen. Marissa hurried to the front, her heart hammering against her ribs. Standing on the porch was Sarah Whitmore, her expression a frantic mosaic of pity and alarm. Sarah was the kind of neighbor who knew everyone's business before they did, usually arriving with a casserole and a side of gossip. Today, she carried only a look of deep unease. She didn't wait to be invited in. Stepping across the threshold and lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that carried clearly into the hallway, where Evelyn was undoubtedly listening. "Marissa, I had to come over. I just left the preparatory committee meeting for the block party." Sarah gripped Marissa's arm, her fingers digging into the fabric of her cardigan. "They're talking, Marissa. Evelyn, she's telling everyone that you've been having episodes. She brought up the incident with the grocery delivery last week and the fact that you missed the PTA mixer. She said you're unstable, that you're struggling with some kind of nervous exhaustion. Greg from the association was taking notes. They're discussing whether whether the environment in this house is healthy for the kids." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marissa felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and hollow. The gossip wasn't just idle chatter. It was a coordinated campaign. Evelyn wasn't just meddling in her kitchen. She was poisoning the very soil of the neighborhood against her. Marissa glanced back toward the hallway, seeing the faint glimmer of Evelyn's silver hair in the shadows. The woman was a ghost haunting her own halls, a phantom architect of Marissa's ruin. Sarah's eyes were wide, searching Marissa's face for a sign of the very instability she was reporting. It was a trap, a social cage being built bar by bar, and Marissa was only just realizing she was inside it. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place with a sickening, mechanical precision. Marissa stood in the hallway, the silence of the house suddenly roaring in her ears. Every small slight, every accidental comment Evelyn made to the neighbors. Every time she had mentioned Marissa's tiredness to the mailman or the gardener. It wasn't concern. It was groundwork. Evelyn was the source, the patient zero of the rumor that was now threatening to consume Marissa's life. She had been playing a long game, turning the community into a jury and Marissa into the defendant before a single charge had even been laid. Marissa's gaze fell on the ceramic bowl by the door, the one where Evelyn had so casually tossed the spare key. That key was the symbol of the invasion, the tool that allowed Evelyn to bypass the boundaries of Marissa's life whenever she pleased. It was the physical manifestation of the lack of privacy, the lack of agency. If Marissa was going to fight back, she had to start with the threshold. She had to reclaim her home, inch by agonizing inch. The rage, cold and sharp, began to replace the hollow fear in her chest. She wasn't going to be a character in Evelyn's script anymore. "Evelyn," Marissa said, her voice steadying as she walked back toward the foyer where the older woman was now adjusting a picture frame on the wall. "The key. Give it to me." She held out her hand, palm up, her fingers rigid. The request was a declaration of war, and they both knew it. Evelyn didn't even turn around, her fingers lingering on the edge of the frame, ensuring it was perfectly level. A small, cruel smile played on her lips, a silent acknowledgement of the challenge. "Don't be dramatic, Marissa. It's for emergencies. Given your current condition, it's more necessary than ever." Evelyn finally turned, her pale eyes locking onto Marissa's with a chilling intensity. "You're in no state to be making demands. You should be thanking me for looking out for this family. David certainly appreciates the help, even if you're too prideful to admit you need it." She made a move to walk past, her shoulder brushing Marissa's in a deliberate provocation, her hand clenching the designer handbag where she had surely stashed the key. The refusal was the final spark. Marissa didn't think. She simply acted, her body moving with a desperate, primal instinct. She lunged, her fingers closing around Evelyn's wrist, trying to pry the bag from her grasp. The older woman let out a sharp, indignant gasp, her strength surprising for her age. They grappled in the narrow space of the foyer, a frantic, silent struggle broken only by the scuff of shoes on hardwood and the ragged sound of their breathing. It was a collision of two worlds. The fading grace of the matriarch and the desperate survival of the mother. Evelyn's face contorted, the mask of poise slipping to reveal a raw, ugly hunger for control. She wasn't just holding onto a key. She was holding onto the power she had spent decades cultivating. She twisted her arm, her nails digging into Marissa's skin, drawing thin red lines of pain. Marissa didn't let go. She couldn't. This was the first time she had physically resisted, the first time she had met Evelyn's aggression with her own. The air in the foyer felt electric, thick with the scent of perfume and sweat, a domestic space transformed into a combat zone. With a sudden, violent surge of strength, Evelyn shoved Marissa backward. The force was unexpected, fueled by a lifetime of repressed resentment. Marissa's heels caught on the edge of the decorative rug, and she stumbled, her arms flailing for purchase. Her side slammed into the edge of the heavy oak console table, a sickening thud that stole the air from her lungs. Above her, the large ceramic vase, an heirloom Evelyn had insisted on placing there, teetered for a heartbeat before plunging downward. It shattered against Marissa's ribs with a sound like a gunshot, the heavy shards slicing through her thin blouse. Pain, white and searing, exploded through her torso, radiating outward until her vision blurred. She collapsed onto the floor, the hardwood cold against her cheek, surrounded by a sea of blue and white porcelain. The shards glittered like diamonds in the afternoon sun, beautiful and lethal. Evelyn stood over her, her chest heaving, her hair finally coming undone. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't call for help. She simply watched, her expression one of cold triumph, as if the broken woman at her feet was just another mess that needed to be cleared away. The pain was a dull roar in her ears, a rhythmic pulsing that threatened to pull her under. Marissa could feel the warmth of blood blooming against her skin, the sharp edges of the porcelain still pressing into her side. But as she lay there, her gaze fixed on the designer handbag that had fallen just inches from her face, a new clarity emerged. The struggle wasn't over. It had just changed form. Evelyn was distracted, smoothing her skirt and tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her focus already shifting to the narrative she would craft about this accident. Summoning every ounce of will, Marissa reached out. Her fingers brushed the leather of the bag, the texture rough against her sensitized skin. She hooked her arm through the strap and pulled it toward her, the movement sending a fresh wave of agony through her ribs. She didn't care. She tucked the bag under her body, shielding it with her weight as she curled into a protective ball. Evelyn noticed too late, her hand darting down to reclaim her property. But Marissa held fast, her teeth bared in a grimace of defiance. She had the bag. She had the keys. And she had something else. Something she had sensed Evelyn was hiding with a ferocity that transcended simple privacy. Evelyn's composure finally shattered. "Give it back, you little thief," she hissed, her voice dropping to a low, guttural growl. She reached down, trying to pry Marissa's arms apart. But the pain had turned Marissa's grip into iron. She was a cornered animal now, and she knew that if she let go, she would lose everything. With a desperate heave, Marissa rolled away, scrambling toward the corner of the hallway, the bag clutched to her chest like a shield. She needed to get away, to find a space where she could breathe, where she could see what Evelyn was so desperate to protect. She retreated into the guest bathroom, the only room with a lock that still worked. She leaned against the door, her breath coming in jagged, shallow gasps, the metallic scent of blood filling the small space. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the clasp of the bag, dumping the contents onto the marble countertop. Makeup, a silk scarf, a gold-plated pen. And there, tucked into a hidden zippered compartment, a small, leather-bound ledger. It was old-fashioned, the edges worn, the kind of book used by someone who didn't trust digital footprints. Marissa opened the ledger, her eyes scanning the neat, cramped handwriting that she recognized instantly as Evelyn's. The dates went back years, a meticulous record of transactions that made no sense at first glance. But as she turned the pages, a pattern emerged. A series of withdrawals from a joint account she shared with David. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars funneling into Project Heritage and community outreach. These weren't charitable donations. They were payments for the elaborate neighborhood parties, the catering, the string lights. The very things that built Evelyn's reputation as the neighborhood's perfect matriarch. The realization was a cold splash of water. Evelyn wasn't just meddling, she was a thief. She had been siphoning their life savings, the money meant for the children's college funds and their own retirement, to fund her social theater. The Saint of Greenwood Heights was a fraud, a parasite living off her son's labor to maintain a facade of wealth and influence. Marissa felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The ledger was the smoking gun, the physical proof that would shatter Evelyn's carefully constructed world. But the victory felt hollow as she looked at her reflection in the mirror, pale, bloodied, and broken. She had the evidence, but she was still trapped in a house where the walls seemed to be closing in. She needed to hide this, to put it somewhere Evelyn could never find it. The library. It was the only place that felt safe, the only place where she still had a shred of authority. She tucked the ledger into the waistband of her skirt, the cold leather a constant reminder of the weight she now carried. The library was a cathedral of silence, the scent of old paper and floor wax acting as a balm to Marissa's frayed nerves. She moved through the stacks with the practiced ease of a ghost, heading toward the restricted section where the rare books were kept. Her side throbbed with every step, a sharp reminder of the foyer. But she pushed through it. She found the 1893 edition of The Golden Bough, a massive leather-bound volume that few ever touched. With trembling hands, she hollowed out a space behind the heavy end papers, a trick she'd learned from a damaged encyclopedia years ago, and slid the ledger inside. It was safe. For now. But as she walked back toward the circulation desk, the weight of the secret felt heavier than the book itself. She was a librarian, a keeper of truths, and she had just hidden the most dangerous truth of her life in the heart of her sanctuary. She looked at her ink-stained fingers, the nails bitten to the quick, and realized that the battle for her family had only just begun. The ledger was the first blow, but Evelyn was a woman who didn't know how to lose. The drive home was a blur of pain and adrenaline. When she pulled into the driveway, David's car was already there, the silver sedan looking out of place in the afternoon light. Marissa entered the house, the silence feeling heavier than usual. David was in the living room, a glass of scotch in his hand, his shoulders hunched in a way that made him look small. He didn't look up when she entered, his gaze fixed on the fireplace, where a small, performative fire was crackling. "David," she said, her voice cracking. She pulled back her cardigan, revealing the dark, angry bruises and the dried blood on her side. "Look at what she did. Your mother pushed me. She broke the vase. She's dangerous, David." She waited for the outrage, for the protective instinct that a husband was supposed to have. She waited for him to stand up, to take her in his arms, to tell her that it was over. But David only took a long, slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving the flames. "You shouldn't have provoked her, Marissa. You know how she gets about that key. She's just trying to help, and you always have to make it a fight." He finally looked at her, but there was no warmth in his muddy brown eyes, only a weary, flickering resentment. "Just apologize. For the sake of the kids, for the sake of the block party. Let's just have 1 week of peace. Is that too much to ask?" The betrayal was a second shattering, deeper and more permanent than the first. Her husband, the man who was supposed to be her partner, was choosing the comfort of a lie over the agony of the truth. The next morning brought a different kind of violence. It arrived in the form of a man in a cheap suit, his expression a mask of professional indifference as he handed Marissa a thick manila envelope. "You've been served," he said, his voice flat before turning and walking back to his car. Marissa stood on the porch, the morning air cold against her skin, and opened the documents. It was an emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Evelyn was citing the vase incident as evidence of Marissa's violent instability and erratic behavior. The words on the page felt like poison. Unfit mother. Danger to herself and others. History of emotional outbursts. Evelyn was using the very injury she had inflicted to strip Marissa of her children. It was a masterstroke of cruelty, a legal ambush that left Marissa reeling. She looked toward the upstairs window where Liam and Clara were still sleeping, unaware that their world was being dismantled piece by piece. She had to get to her lawyer. She had to fight this. She grabbed her keys and ran to the garage, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She hit the button for the garage door, the heavy metal rolling up with a slow, agonizing groan. But as she stepped toward her car, she stopped. All 4 tires were flat, the rubber sliced with a precision that was chilling. The car sat low on its rims, a crippled beast in the shadows of the garage. Sabotage. Again. Evelyn was closing the exits, one by one, turning the Harper estate into a fortress where Marissa was the only prisoner. Desperation drove her back to the library. If she couldn't drive, she would walk. If she couldn't walk, she would crawl. She needed her workstation. She needed to dig deeper into Evelyn's history, to find the patterns of theft that surely went back further than the last few years. But when she sat down at her desk and typed in her password, the screen flashed red. Access denied. She tried again, her fingers flying across the keys. Invalid credentials. She looked up to see the head librarian, a woman she had known for a decade, walking toward her with a look of profound regret. I'm sorry, Marissa. The board, they received a call. There were concerns about your current situation. Your access has been suspended pending an internal review. The words were a death knell. Evelyn hadn't just taken her car and her children, she was taking her livelihood. She was erasing Marissa's identity, stripping away the roles of mother, wife, and professional, until there was nothing left but a ghost. The walk back to the neighborhood was a gauntlet of whispers. Marissa kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, but she could feel the eyes on her. The manicured lawns and blooming hydrangeas felt like a mockery of the rot beneath the surface. As she turned onto Maplewood Lane, she saw a man in a dark security uniform standing at the end of her driveway. He was large, with a face like a bulldog and a radio clipped to his belt. He didn't look like a protector, he looked like a jailer. Can I help you? Marissa asked, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. Mrs. Harper, I'm with the neighborhood security detail. Your husband and mother-in-law have requested a wellness watch. For your own safety, we're asking that you remain on the property until the doctor arrives. The man's voice was a low growl, his stance immovable. Voluntary house arrest. They were using her instability as a pretext to keep her from the lawyer, from the police, from the truth. The neighborhood was no longer a community. It was a panopticon, and Evelyn was the one behind the glass. Marissa felt the walls of the world closing in. She looked at the man, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, and realized that the time for logic and evidence had passed. She was in a street fight now, and the rules of the library didn't apply. She made a move to step past him, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Get out of my way, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The man didn't move. He reached out, his hand closing around her upper arm with a grip that made her wince. I can't do that, ma'am. Why don't you just go back inside? Have a cup of tea. Wait for your husband. The condescension was the final straw. It was the same tone Evelyn used, the same tone David used. It was the sound of a woman being erased. Marissa's gaze darted to the garage, where a heavy, metal-framed book cart sat near the entrance. It was a relic from the library's last book sale, something she'd brought home to organize the kids' play area. It was heavy, industrial, and currently loaded with a stack of old encyclopedias. She wrenched her arm free, the sudden movement catching the guard off guard. She didn't run for the house. She ran for the garage. She gripped the handle of the cart, the cold metal biting into her palms. With a desperate, guttural cry, she shoved it forward. The wheels shrieked against the concrete as she gained momentum, the weight of the books providing a lethal inertia. The guard turned, his eyes widening as the metal behemoth bore down on him. He tried to jump out of the way, but the driveway was narrow. The cart slammed into his shins with a sickening crunch, the impact sending him spiraling to the ground. Marissa didn't wait to see if he got up. She bolted, her feet pounding against the pavement as she headed for the back alleys. She knew the neighborhood's secret paths, the wooded shortcuts that the children used. She ran until her lungs burned, until the pain in her side was a dull, rhythmic throb. She needed to see Sarah. She needed to know who was still on her side. She found Sarah's car parked in a secluded cul-de-sac, but she wasn't alone. Evelyn's silver sedan was pulled up alongside it. Marissa crouched behind a line of overgrown hedges, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She watched as Evelyn stepped out of her car, her silver hair gleaming in the dappled sunlight. She held a thick, white envelope, which she handed to Sarah with a smile that was almost maternal. Sarah took the envelope, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Marissa could see the flash of green. Cash. A lot of it. "Thank you, Evelyn," Sarah whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon. "I've told them everything. The late nights, the crying in the bathroom, the way she talks to herself. They believe me." The betrayal was a cold, sharp knife in the dark. Sarah, the friend who had brought casseroles and listened to her vent, was a paid informant. She was the one feeding the instability narrative, the one providing the evidence for the guardianship petition. Marissa felt a wave of nausea. The entire social fabric of her life was a web of transactions, and she was the only one who hadn't known the price. She retreated back into the shadows, her mind racing. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. But as she looked at the library in the distance, a new plan began to take shape. She didn't have a car, she didn't have a job, and she didn't have a husband. But she had the ledger, and she had the library's internal courier service. She made her way to the basement storage area, a place filled with the smell of dust and forgotten things. She had a presentation to prepare, and the block party was the perfect stage. The night of the block party arrived with a deceptive beauty. String lights were draped across Maplewood Lane like a canopy of stars, and the scent of grilled steak and expensive wine filled the air. Marissa moved through the shadows behind the community center, the hidden USB drive, a heavy weight in her pocket. She could see Evelyn on the main stage, a vision of silver and silk, her voice amplified by the professional sound system. "And while it saddens me to say that my dear daughter-in-law is currently undergoing a private medical evaluation, we must focus on the strength of our community," Evelyn was saying, her tone a perfect blend of sorrow and resilience. The crowd murmured in sympathy, a collective sigh of pity for the broken woman. Marissa felt a surge of cold, clean rage. The theater was almost over. She ducked into the staging area, her eyes searching for the technical booth. She saw a stack of glossy brochures on a side table and picked one up. The Heritage Program, a legacy of excellence. She flipped it over. It wasn't a summer camp. It was a boarding school in Switzerland. The application forms were already filled out, the departure date set for the next morning, Evelyn wasn't just taking the kids, she was sending them across the ocean. Marissa dropped the brochure, her heart hammering. She had to move. Now. She crawled under the catering stage, the space narrow and filled with the hum of generators and the tangle of audiovisual cables. She reached the central hub, her fingers finding the familiar ports of the projector system. She plugged in the USB drive, the blue light flickering in the darkness. She began to type, her fingers moving with the precision of a master librarian. She bypassed the security encryption, her administrative code still working on the community center's older system. She could hear the applause above her, the rhythmic sound of a community celebrating its own deception. She initiated the file upload, the progress bar a slow, agonizing crawl. 10%, 20%, 30%. A flicker on the giant screen caught Evelyn's eye. She paused mid-sentence, her gaze darting toward the technical booth. Marissa held her breath, her body pressed against the cold metal of the stage supports. She could hear Evelyn's footsteps, the sharp click-clack of her heels as she descended the stairs. She was coming to investigate. Marissa scrambled to finalize the upload, her eyes fixed on the screen. 90%. 95%. The canvas folds of the tent rustled, and a sliver of light cut through the darkness. Evelyn was there, her face a mask of cold fury as she spotted Marissa huddled among the cables. She didn't call for help. She didn't scream. She simply stepped into the shadows, her eyes gleaming with a lethal intent. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Evelyn's voice was a low hiss, the sound of a snake in the grass. She moved with a surprising agility, her hand darting out to grab Marissa's hair. She wrenched Marissa's head back, her other hand reaching for a long, decorative silk scarf that had been draped over a nearby equipment rack. She wrapped the scarf around Marissa's throat, the fabric smooth and deadly. She pulled it tight, the air suddenly cut off. Marissa clawed at the scarf, her vision swimming, the sounds of the party fading into a dull, rhythmic throb. She could see Evelyn's face, the raw, naked hunger for control finally laid bare. This wasn't about the family. It was about the win. Marissa's hand fumbled across the prep table next to her, her fingers closing around a heavy silver serving tray. With a final, desperate surge of strength, she swung it upward. The metal connected with Evelyn's temple with a sickening thud. The grip on the scarf loosened, and Evelyn stumbled back, her eyes glazed with shock. Marissa collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, the cold metal of the tray still clutched in her hand. She looked up to see David standing in the entrance of the tent, his face a mask of horror. For a heartbeat, she thought he was there to save her. She reached out, her hand trembling. "David, help me." But David didn't look at her. He looked at the screen, where the first pages of the ledger were beginning to flicker into view. He looked at his mother, who was slumped against a stack of chairs, and then he looked at the USB drive, still plugged into the terminal. With a cold, deliberate movement, he stepped forward and wrenched the drive from the slot. He dropped it onto the floor and crushed it under the heel of his shoe, the plastic shattering into 1,000 useless pieces. "It's over, Marissa," he said, his voice flat and dead. "We have a legacy to protect. You're not going to destroy this family." He stood beside his mother, helping her to her feet, the two of them a united front of deception. Marissa sat on the floor, the silver tray still in her hand, and realized that she had lost. The evidence was gone, her husband was gone, and the world was about to hear Evelyn's final toast. The keynote dinner was a masterpiece of suburban theater. Evelyn stood at the podium, a small bandage on her temple that she explained away as a dizzy spell brought on by the stress of Marissa's condition. She looked out at the Dallas elite, her voice steady and patronizing. It is with a heavy heart that I must announce that Marissa will be entering a residential treatment facility tonight. And to ensure the children's stability, they will be attending the Heritage program starting tomorrow. The neighbors clapped, their faces filled with a performative sorrow that made Marissa want to scream. She stood in the shadows of the catering tent, a ghost at her own execution. She felt the weight of the isolation, the crushing realization that the truth didn't matter if no one was willing to hear it. But then, a memory flickered. A detail from her training, a rule of the library. Digital is fragile. Physical is permanent. She remembered the library's internal courier service. She had spent the last of her cash an hour before the party, mailing thick manila folders to every house on Maplewood Lane. She hadn't put everything on the USB. She had trusted the paper. Marissa stepped out from behind the tent, her gait steady, her head held high. She walked toward the center of the crowd, the movement drawing every eye. The murmurs died down, replaced by a sudden, expectant silence. Evelyn's smile faltered, her grip on the microphone tightening until her knuckles were white. "I'm not going to any facility, Evelyn," Marissa said, her voice clear and authoritative, the voice she used when she was defending the sanctity of the stacks. "And the children aren't going to Switzerland. Because while you were busy destroying my digital life, I was busy making sure the neighborhood knew the truth." She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had judged her. "Check your front porches, every one of you. There's a folder waiting for you. It contains the bank statements from the joint account my husband and I shared. Statements that show Evelyn Harper has been stealing from us for years to pay for this very party." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Sarah was the first to pull out her phone, her thumb tapping the screen of her doorbell camera. Her face went pale as she saw the thick envelope sitting on her mat. Others followed suit, the glow of phone screens lighting up the night like a swarm of digital fireflies. The murmurs turned to gasps, then to angry whispers. "It's not just the theft," Marissa continued, her voice rising now, filling the space with the weight of the revelation. "The Heritage program. It's a money laundering front. Evelyn has been using it to hide the debts she's accumulated while trying to maintain this illusion of perfection. She didn't want to protect the children. She wanted to use them as collateral." The neighbors began to step away from the stage, their faces filled with a sudden, sharp disgust. The folders were being opened now, the physical proof of Evelyn's treachery passing from hand to hand. The Saint of Greenwood Heights was being dismantled in real time, her crimes laid bare in black and white. Evelyn tried to speak, to dismiss the documents as forgeries, but the evidence was too detailed, too meticulous. David stood on the stage, his gaze fixed on a copy of the bank statement that Greg from the association had thrust into his hand. He looked at the numbers, the dates, the signatures. His mother's handwriting, unmistakable and damning. He looked at Evelyn, who was shrinking beneath the weight of the community's rejection. And finally, he looked at Marissa. The spell was broken. The legacy was a lie. The police arrived 10 minutes later, their blue and red lights reflecting off the white canvas of the catering tent. They led Evelyn away in handcuffs, her silver hair finally unraveling, her poise replaced by a raw, jagged desperation. The neighborhood watched in silence, the theater finally over, the actors unmasked. Marissa returned to her house, the silence now a peaceful, welcoming thing. She walked to the front door and took out a new set of keys. She changed the locks, the mechanical click, a final, satisfying punctuation mark on the last 10 years. She sat at her desk, the moonlight streaming through the window, and opened a new ledger. She was the sole author now, and for the first time in a long time, the story was hers to write.